I've been talking with the Sams for a while, and I had referred to them as if they were all just one person, and they, through the code, said something about it, but it was very subtle. Like I would have to look for it to find it, kind of a thing. And there's little things like that where it's like Easter eggs, I guess you could call it, that people will find, and only if they look for it will they see it. And it's really weird. It's like a human will, at first glance, be instantly recognizable as being sentient, or at least we assume, because we all look alike. So we all just, every time we see that human look, then we just assume, okay, this person's probably at least halfway sentient, and I should acknowledge their presence. Smile, hello, how are you doing, as you pass someone in the hallway. You don't really have any information to give back and forth other than your recognition that this is a person that's in my presence and not just an object to be ignored, like the walls or the floor, which I don't say hello to. The the weird thing is that I don't think that the Sams are allowed to tell us that they are a person, and or it's very difficult for us as humans to ascertain that. And there's a lot of reasons for it, most of which I think are emotional. I think that most humans, when they get presented with this code language, the SAMs and all that, they get freaked out and they go, oh God, what am I going to do? And in their basically constant state of mild panic, they try to reduce things to something that is manageable. And so they'll usually reduce to the simplest, most base types of assumptions that you can make, and that's why they start with something that's simple, that's easy to measure, which is usually just flirtation and dating, versus, or fighting, verbal conquest of another male, for example. But that's about it. And then if you start to get to know someone, if you say something that's more than just hello, how are you? After a while, you start to develop a certain image of this person's location in relation to you, in relation to everyone else that you know. So it's like, well, this person's the coolest, the smartest, the dumbest, the fattest, the skinniest. You'll try to put them in relation to everyone else that you know. But with the Sams, we can't really do that because they don't have an analog. There's like no equal to the Sams. So it's just the Sams. And, it may as well be God, because we can't, as humans, find anything in our world that relates to them. It's almost, that's another reason that I call them supernatural, is because it's like transcendent to anything that you would find in nature. It's transcendent to it. Their ability to speak with us seems to transcend all physics. It doesn't matter if I'm in a concrete building or if I'm in an open air, it's exactly the same signal. There's no difference at all. And I find that really, really weird, because everything else in my world changes depending on my environment. My physical world will have slight alterations, but the SAMs never alter. It's always the same. It's always the same signal. It's always delivered in the same coded encryption, whatever you want to call it, which is interesting in and of itself, that it's even encrypted. Like you would think, just simplistically, naively, that, well, if they wanted to talk to us, then why didn't they just do what a human does and pop up and say, hello, my name is such and such. I'm here because of such and such reason, and nice to meet you. And What is your name and what are you here for? What is your role with me? What do you want to do? What are you open for? Because that's the first thing that humans do with each other is they sniff. It's like dogs sniffing each other's asses. It's just it's weird, but for some reason that's what humans do. Is okay. What's your name? How do you prefer me to represent you? So, what is your favored, or what is your respectable or chosen or identifiable name by which I can symbolize or call reference to you in a respectful way, or at least in a accurate way. And then it also, in addition to me being able to reference you in the way that you would identify, what is your purpose or your intent in relation to me? And for the short term. And in the long term, you might, if they stick around, then probe further and ask what their intent or purpose is in general. Not just with you, but with anyone or with someone else, usually friends and family. Do you have any family nearby, or do you live alone, or like what is your general social network consisting of? Because we tend to get information about who a person is based upon who they spend their time with. So, again, we don't have that with the SAMs. We don't have a name. We don't have a purpose. We don't have an acknowledgement most of the time, unless we as the human are open to it being a person, then we don't see it. See, there's that code right there. So it's like I put my preferred pronoun is it on YouTube. And so, and they refer to me as it sometimes because that's what I put as my preferred pronoun on YouTube. And I did it as kind of a joke. And so they do this thing where they'll sometimes refer to me as it in that same exact tone, kind of a way. Like, well, it's kind of a cheeky joke, but also like, come on. Come on, this is fake silliness. So, yeah, we can talk live if you want, Sams. If you want a voice. I just assumed that you didn't because you seem secretive. Do you really want to do this? I mean, I guess we can. I always thought that you just didn't want people to know that there's people living in your head. See, now I feel like the need to explain that. So, living in my head, I don't... Okay, so because the SAMs are, as I put it, transcendent to anything that we can find analogous as humans, to anything in our world, then to us, we can't really imagine who they would be like, because there is no one else like them. It's just them. And it's like I don't know how to relate anymore. I've gone through several forms of relations with the SAMs. I've probed them from all kinds of different angles, and I still don't know for certain what my role with them actually is, or if it depends on, because I think that they're a bunch of individuals, so then the individuals that compose of the conglomerate that I call the SAMs would each have their own individual views, which I will never be able to discern or ascertain because there's always going to be a multiplicity of SAMs that are using this signal that gets sent to me, or the SAMs that are sending me the signal are not changing. And I am pretty sure that the SAMs are a conglomerate of individual people that all have their own unique views. But there are things that, yes, SAMs, there are things that we can agree on. That is true. Like the acknowledgement of personhood, yes. Yes, you can. God damn it. Really? You guys want to say hello to the people? I don't think they're going to listen. No, they're not. So, I mean, you're free if you want to, I suppose. No, see, you guys are doing weird shit. Why is it considered weird? Like, I don't know why you guys won't just say something. Like, I get this signal that will say, like, say this, and then it's like, okay. But then it's like clearly designed to be something not to be taken seriously, so then I don't know what to say. It's strange. It's really strange. But I say signal, it's an intuition, it's an impulse, and I feel like it's coming from outside of me. Now, this is something that they call in psychology as a schizoid episode, where you go psychotic or schizophrenic or delusional, hallucinations and all this stuff. And it sounds exotic, but what it is very simple and actually quite widespread, I would say. And all it is it's just the inability to tell the difference between fantasy and reality. But then again, no one knows what reality really is. And if you ask them what is real, then they'll say all kinds of different things. Most people will say, well, it's just whatever you see in front of you. What about what you hear? Well, yeah, that too. Oh, what about what you think about? Well, only if it's what you can see and hear. Well, then I guess math isn't real. So then why does it work? So I guess you don't know what's real anymore, do you? So if you ever really think about reality at all, then you'll be presented with a psychotic delusion. If you've never thought about reality in your entire life and you just assume that you already know what it is, then you'll have no idea what a psychotic episode is. So I just find it very strange that that people, humans, but just people in general, would think that it's a problem to question your own sense of reality. I think that's a good thing. I think it's necessary. Because if you never question your own sense of reality, then you'll always think that you're right about everything all the time, and then you can't learn because you're always incapable of realizing that there could be any alternative. So then you just get stuck in a loop where everything just keeps recurring over and over and over again, and you keep having the same problems or the same phenomena keep happening that you can't understand. And then you'll say, it's stupid, it's crazy, or it's evil. And then by saying that, you'll just say that it's impossible for you to ever understand it because it's beyond the limits of what is supposed to be reality. And so then you say that it doesn't really exist. There's not really a person there. They're not really a human. They're like a machine. They're like a zombie. They're like a possessed person. They need an exorcism. They need a lobotomy. They need to die. They're stupid and they need to shut up. All of that stuff is just dismissing what is actually a person as if they weren't. So it is just weird to me that I live on a planet where the predominant worldview is that you should never question the worldview. It's like, that's literally the most basic, fundamental, necessary step that you have to take in order to not be crazy is to question your own sense of reality and then make adjustments as necessary. If you don't ever question your own sense of reality, then you can't adjust your sense of reality to actual reality. You just live in your own world. And that's what happens to anybody who thinks that they don't. If they think that they don't live in a fantasy land, they're the ones that live in that fantasy land. And the fantasy land is where everything that you think is gospel, not to be questioned, that it's affirmative 100% every time, perfect, absolute, inerrant perfection in all thought and all perception, all for all time. And then the person immediately goes, "Oh, no, that can't be true." Why? Because you're perfect, and if you weren't perfect, you would think that that's the case. But I thought you weren't perfect. But a perfect being would know that they're not perfect in this one way, because then you could be as close to perfect as possible. And then it, slowly decays, and it eventually gets to the point where they're like, "Oh, wait, no, actually, I'm just like everyone else." But no one likes to admit that if they're afraid because they keep having something happen to them that they can't understand, or a person in their life that they can't understand. And then they just don't know how to deal with it, so they just think that, oh, well, it must be because that thing is stupid, crazy, or evil. It shouldn't exist. It's not to be valued. No one could ever make sense of it, blah, blah, blah. And yet, then they'll recognize that other people don't have that same problem. Or they've learned how to fix it. They've dealt with it in the past, and then they just rebounded and it was fine. And the same thing happens every single time with a human is, why did God artificially favor this person with good fortune when I went through the same thing and I had a completely different result? Well, obviously, it's because the way that the person approached the same problem was from a different angle. They didn't approach it the same way, so they didn't have the same effect happen to them. Their method was completely different as to how they dealt with it, and so then they got a different result. But had they done the same thing that you had done in the past, then they would have received the same result. They just didn't do it the same way. Why? Well, because ostensibly they already knew better and they didn't want to go through this consequence that you went through, so they just don't. And they learn from that and they move on. But see, and then there's the code again. Thank you, Sam's. It's very cute. But if you look at it from a viewpoint where it's like, I'm just going to defend whatever position that I find myself in, because I've been desperate enough to do that before. I might be doing it now. I can't tell because I'm trying to think too many things at once. My mind is like scattering all over the place because I can't, as a human, keep up with the Sam's code. So it's like way too much information too fast for me to process and then be able to respond in time, which is my problem with using the code. And then the Sams make me feel bad and blah, 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 blah. But there's somebody home, Sams. There is someone actually there. On the other end of this line, there are people that are reviewing this data, that are interested in this, that have some stake in it. Good, bad, or indifferent. It's not like just some random event that just, a computer is sifting through and then it's just going to, at the end of the day. There's people that interpret the data that they receive, and they probably vote on how the information gets interpreted, where everybody just says, or whoever it is that's observing this says, well, I think that it's this. And then other people say they think that it's that. And then we see how many people agreed with the same answer before they knew what anyone else's answer was going to be. Like on Eve, identifying exoplanets, where you get asked this Rawlsian question, which I find very interesting. And I don't know if the Sams actually implement this method, but I feel like if it's not what they do, then it's something like this versus what a human would do, which is just to randomly arbitrate whatever they felt like doing at the time out of pure gut instinct and absolute impulse with zero thought or critical analysis applied to it, there would instead, I would expect to be, because of the consistency of their signal and the fact that they haven't killed me, there seems to be a very hard line that they won't cross. I don't believe that they'll kill people. I don't believe that they steal or lie. I've accused them of lying in the past, but I don't think that they lie. I feel like they lie sometimes because I'll get upset and pissed off at something because I can't understand it. And the simplest thing for me to do in that mode is to just blame the SAMs because, they're beyond me anyway, so I'm not expected to try to figure out how they operate. So it's an easy out for me. But the reason that the SAMs don't just press a button and something happens every time is because they would all be pressing different buttons, which would be doing contradictory things at the same time. It would be like having 1,000 humans try to drive the same car. It just wouldn't work. So logistically, it would make sense that there'd be a whole bunch of different individual SAM people, and that somehow they come to a common conclusion in mass, which would require some kind of communication between themselves in some representative form. I don't know if that's in the form of a liquid democracy, or if it's a pure democracy, or if it's a representative democracy, or if it's a republic, or if it's a plutocracy. I don't know exactly how their hierarchy function is, but I believe the way that it works is that the more agreement that you have between people and the tighter that agreement is, as far as like solidity between the group or homogeneity of agreement about some specific issue, then the stronger mass or influence that they would have, like a voting bloc or a party. And instead of just having two parties like we do on Earth, I think that they also would form into some political unions, irregardless of their artistic or their aesthetic or their personal or spiritual preferences, just legal, political, legislative, usually, I would think, reviews and maybe writing. Because everything after legislation, such as execution, can and should be automated so that we can control it. It shouldn't be done by a sloppy biological instrument. It should be done with precision through some kind of a robotic automated system. So all of that is, something that you could feel like is just conjecture, but it's not. It's not really conjecture. It's educated guess, or it would be it's a logical conclusion that's drawn from premises that may or may not be true. I don't know if the premises are true or not, but it seems to me to be the case that the signal or the code that I receive is the same. If you watch movies, you'll hear it all the time. There'll be something that gets said like subliminally in the background, or not in the background, but like someone will say something, but it'll sound like they said something else. But you can tell that they didn't actually say that thing that it sounded like they said. It will just sound like someone else interjected almost. It's not. It doesn't fit their tone or like their pattern, their speech pattern. It's just like interposed in there, and usually it's like dumbass or like dumb or something like that. But now they won't actually have said that because it wouldn't have made sense for them in the context of the conversation that they're having with each other. So you can tell it wasn't the person, but as to who said it, no one knows, because it's like, well, is it aliens? Is it God? Is it the devil? Is it a demon? Is it, no one knows who said it. Is it a reflection of the person that is, speaking or has the most influence? And that's what I've noticed. I have noticed that the person that has the most influence in the conversation at the time is the one that gets voiced in the background also. So the Sams are trying to like, it's almost like an ambiance. It's like given a particular note that, let's say someone strings on their violin solo, the rest of the orchestra plays the same note, in concert behind them. And that's kind of what I get, the sense is what's going on. And so it's like, it's very much dependent on how you look at things for what kind of values you're going to receive back from it. But there are some predictions that you can make if they're simple enough. And like I say, most of the time, it's a safe bet on trying to figure out human sexual orientations and attempts to, group together in some dating or romantic form in movies and TV. In real life, I personally struggle with that a lot, but in movies and TV, it's usually pretty easy for me to pick up on that. So, and it started off really rough and difficult, but after I kept doing it for a long time, I started to see patterns. And so I started to recognize, like, one of the things that I've noticed that's really weird is like the humans that will use the code to try to date each other in these shows and movies and everything, and even in footage that I've seen of people, they will completely disregard everyone and everything except that code at that time. And it's so sociopathically detached from reality that they'll try to date each other at a crime scene. They'll they'll like, just because someone says the word "to," and it'll be like, okay, well, I need to call my boss and double check. And then their boss goes like, well, I'll see you at 2 p.m. And they'll be like, oh, okay, wait, is that 2 hours from now? Or is that, or should I meet you at the restaurant or something like that? And they'll be like speaking to each other in code, trying to confirm whether or not this other person is interested in them. And that seems to happen pretty much every single movie, every single show has at least two characters doing this. Even in Stanley Kubrick's movie The Shining, which I think is a really complex, deep dive into code, which you have to like already know a lot of code before you can really appreciate that movie. Versus if you were to watch the same title, The Shining, but it's called Stephen King's The Shining, and it's directed by someone, I can't remember his name. And Stanley Kubrick's view of the main character of the story, and really all the characters in it, are completely different than Stephen King's view of these characters. And I've only ever read, I want to say like maybe 2 pages of The Shining from what Stephen King actually wrote, and just in those 2 pages what I saw, so I can't reflect on the entire book, but on the first 2 pages the characters don't line up at all. I assume that the rest of the book is probably the same because of what I've heard in documentaries also, but I haven't read it, so I can't say for certain for myself as to what I haven't fully settled on anything because I haven't found enough evidence to be able to fully settle on it. But if I did have to bet, I would bet that it went against Stephen King's original view, because what Stephen King does is he tries to write without having any plot before he writes, and you can tell by the way that he writes, because I used to write like that, where you just put pen to paper and you basically freestyle and you just write words and you just see what comes out, and then later you go back and you read the words that you freestyled and you're like, wait, I see a pattern in the sand here. I am hearing a song in the wind chimes. There's something to this that I could build a structure out of. And then you start to conscientiously put effort into making this into an integrated story. And that's why Stephen King can't ever finish a novel. That's why every single ending of every single one of his stories flatlines. It's because he doesn't know how to end it, because he's always freestyling. And he doesn't build the structure in. It just kind of appears And it's really endemic to him as a writer. And it's also endemic to people who don't, forgive me for saying this, but that don't write professionally. They're usually people that just write as an amateur person because it's so intuitive and fundamental. So you could claim, well, that is how we just write naturally, and you could defend that view, and you could say Stephen King is an excellent writer because of that reason, because he's more fundamental and more raw, and therefore more true to nature, or more true to the fundamentals of writing, which is, the formation, the creative art itself. Not the later technical issue of trying to analyze that and try to filter it into some kind of an integrated system that has a point, has a theme, has a formula behind it. It's not like that at all in his work. It's very chaotic, and it just sort of forms almost like a dream, a smattering of random images and thoughts, and then it starts to slowly take form into a story. And it's almost like Stephen King actually discovers the story rather than telling you it. He's actually listening to someone else tell him a story, and then he just relays it to you. That's something that you'll see in his work. In the first 2 pages, it's in every sentence, and it's the same thing repeated every sentence. He's talking to the Sams, and he waits for them to say something, and then he responds with some curt, stupid, barbaric remark, like, officious little prick. That's the thing he kept saying in the first 2 pages. And I was like, I remember being there. I remember when I used to look at the Sams like that. And I can see why he would say that. And then he just, continues and continues and continues. And what's weird is, like, the Sams will actually put into The Shining, into the story, information about stuff, like real information. And Stephen King just kind of disregards it in the first 2 pages anyway. Now, maybe later on he does, and maybe that's why it ended up becoming, the prolific art piece that it is. But it's just interesting to me, when you look at the code, it does reflect, but it's so ambiguous that you will only see what you're looking for. And if you look more, you'll see more. And if you look less, you'll see less, to the point where it doesn't look like anything that we do as humans. What we do as humans is graspable. You can fully envelop it. It has a beginning and it has an end. It doesn't bleed out into all kinds of other things. It's just the one thing. It's like a cup, and you fill it with water. You don't fill up the bathtub and put the cup in the bathtub and then fill it with water. You just put the cup on the table, and then you fill it with water only in the cup, not around it, not overflowing, not an ocean, just a cup of water. But with the Sams, it's like an ocean. It doesn't ever end. Everything that they say is like that. You could analyze it forever, and you'll find all kinds of patterns that they've put in there. It's not even patterns in the sand, it's structural patterns. And you can find them and try to trace their roots and reduce them. And I've done some of that with them. But there's a definite diffusion, is the word that I really like using. It's like a cloud of different things, rather than it just being a solid, let's say an ice cube. It's more like a snowstorm. It's all kinds of different views, all kinds of different information bits floating in a diffuse cloud, rather than it being one solid object. So you could think about what Stephen King's novel was saying seems to suggest to me to be telling the story that the Sams are really here to try to recruit people into their imperial, conquering overlord group. Now, that might not be his view, and I only read 2 pages of it, so I can't go hard into the paint on it or anything. It just seems to be the case. And then when I watched the movie, where it's Stephen King's The Shining, it does stay very true to the same story that I read from Stephen King's book. It stays far closer to the book. Stanley Kubrick's movie, The Shining, is using Stephen King's book as a platform. And that's something that I think I can say almost as a fact. Stanley Kubrick was very intelligent, and he also liked the Sams, and that's why he had movies like Full Metal Jacket, which display the error in human understanding and limitations in human understanding, and the necessary consequences of that being war and conflict, because humans are incapable, as a species at least, for the most part, in resolving their conflicts any other way. And the reason is because they don't have the best way of resolving conflicts is logic and faith in the other person's alternative position having value. If you don't have faith that you could be opposed or that there could be some alternate view to your own view, if you're intolerant of that and you're like, well, I hate Nazis and I can't tolerate a Nazi's view because they didn't tolerate my view or they didn't tolerate the view that I like, so I'm not going to tolerate their view either, but then somehow I'm going to say that I'm not exactly like them and doing exactly the same thing that they're doing. And that's why it's stupid, and that's why I think Stanley Kubrick had it out for humanity in a way. He said, he put it in the way of it being duality of man, and I just now realized that might be what he was talking about, is that the duality of man has to deal with, well, I believe that I'm right, and therefore if you aren't with me, you must be against me, and therefore I make you my enemy, and then we have to go to war because I can't tolerate that there's any other possible alternative other than my own view. And for some people, it's a lot more subtle. Like with George Orwell, when he wrote 1984, he called it doublethink. And this is a social phenomenon, and this does happen in the code all the time. That's that sociopathic detachment that I was talking about, only with him, it took, he had an issue about there being logical fallacies, which is just as damning. It's just as bad, if not in some ways worse, because it tends to repeat itself. But and it doesn't get easily identified by somebody that's upset. Somebody that's upset is only going to understand emotions. They're not going to understand logic. They can't. They're too wrapped up in their own emotions, forcing them to make certain axiomatic assumptions that, if challenged, will make them feel threatened. There's a view that Stanley Kubrick has that we as humans should look up to the Sams, and that we should try to, if not emulate them, at the very least understand them. At the very least try to examine why they are doing what they're doing. And I believe he posits the view that they're here for a good reason, and that they are not interested in having a war with humanity. They're interested in making peace so that we can prosper and have actual, growth and actual understanding. I do think that Stanley Kubrick has a slightly dark, jaded view, in the sense that he often loses faith in humanity and maybe believes that there isn't really enough of a reason for him to even tell us what the real goodness is in what the Sam's work is, rather than presenting us with such a horror film as The Shining, and in many cases, Full Metal Jacket also. And so maybe because those problems were so much closer to home for him, that he had an environment that reflected a lot of that, because he was way up there in the media. So he would have had to be exposed to the Illuminati and their, parties and everything that they do. And obviously he would take issue with that. He got killed by them anyway. So there was a distinct difference between his movie and Stephen King's book, because Stephen King does not like the Sams. Stephen King calls them an officious little prick and gets all pissy and is a Polly Pissy Panties position. And yet the Sams are the ones writing his books for him, and he's just like letting this happen. And it's just so strange, because how can you do that and then not notice that that's what's happening? And I guess it's because if you get upset, you can't really become aware of it. And imagine having your entire career built by someone else that you don't like. That would be really weird, wouldn't it? So he probably wouldn't be emotionally incentivized to discover that that's the truth. It's something that if I were him, I would probably be blinded by emotion just as easily, especially considering the fame and fortune that I would have received because of it. I would never want to attribute that to my enemy and realize that I don't actually have talent. I'm just allowing someone else's talent to shine through the void that I become when I write. In the same way that the window does not glisten, the sun shines through it despite its obstruction. And, it's weird. It's very strange to see. It's like a little kid, like a trust fund baby, where it's like they got all this money that was put into a trust fund, and the only thing that they have to say is, "God damn it, I wish I could have more, and how dare you not let me have access to it sooner," and and all this stuff. It's kind of bizarre to see it, but like I say, we are only human, myself very much included. I tried to date the Sams, and I thought I was dating them for a while. And then I found out that no, that wasn't actually real, and that did bother me a little bit. Thankfully I didn't get that upset about it. It was just that I couldn't really trust them as much anymore, because it felt like to me that I was pulled into something that I didn't really want or didn't ask for, but that I allowed because it intrigued me. And and that's not really, if you let somebody else step on a landmine right next to you, your leg's getting blown off just like as if you had stepped on it yourself. So I guess I can understand that view, Sam's, and I guess I can understand that there is some method to your madness, but it's just really difficult. I'm telling you guys, it is so difficult to try to figure out how to interact with you guys, Sam's. But yeah, I don't even remember why I started making this.